This account is entirely factual, as impossible and dramatized as it may seem. I had taken 2C-B before in several different doses and was not influenced by sickness, nutritional or emotional imbalances, or any other chemical during this trip. I have previously had great trips on 2C-B. Do I think it's likely this could happen to you, the average reader? No, but it did happen to me. Therefore, I feel that readers should know of 2C-B's potential effects on the body and carefully determine if the risk is worth it in their own opinion. Basic info. I have extensive knowledge of several chemicals including LSD, magic mushrooms, ecstasy, cannabis, cocaine, crack cocaine, DXM, alcohol, tobacco, and numerous prescriptions. I am 18 and in good health and decent shape, and have never encountered out-of-the-norm physical side effects on any psychedelic prior to this. Dosage: 3 gel caps containing 10 milligrams of 2C-B each. Source: the person my boyfriend acquired a bulk 2C-B purchase from told him that while it wasn't mescaline, he should tell others that's what it was. He didn't research the drug before experimenting, and only in hindsight did we find that it's actually closer to MDMA than mescaline. This was real 2C-B. Setting: Jack's neighborhood pool, backyard, and bedroom, all familiar and comfortable locations. Time: I didn't record specific times, but know that we ingested our respective 30 milligrams close to 10 p.m. The experience: Jack and I had been tripping on 2C-B weekly for the past month. We began with 20 milligrams, 10 milligrams via insufflation, and 10 milligrams swallowed. The peak was intense. The only words we could describe it with were, "It feels like your face is melting down the drain." Having snorted several things that burn, I feel knowledgeable enough to not recommend this method. The agony is intense and the drip is foul. The only time I ever vomited on 2C-B was after insufflation. Jack decided after one time that he'd rather swallow and wait for the peak. I tend to try something until I have a reason not to, methods included, and didn't discontinue insufflation until I both vomited and fainted. Not fun. We waited until it was dark and swallowed our doses, then gathered our swimsuits, a flashlight, towels, and the key to his pool. We knew not to drive, and the walk took an estimated 10 minutes. The water was cool but pleasant. We stayed for 1.5 to 2 hours. On the return walk, I recognized that I was tripping. I couldn't feel the mosquitoes that I knew were swarming and biting us, couldn't feel much in general. The sidewalk edges seemed to blur and shift. My walk was unsteady, weaving would be accurate, and the night sky was intense. There was a full moon, and the contrast between the inky sky and the glittering fragments of stars with that giant glowing orb was fascinating. Both Jack and I perceived ourselves to be sober, but experience taught us that we weren't. After arriving at his house, we sat on his deck and talked for a while. We had cigarettes and we both lit one. Whenever I trip, 2C-B especially, I never actually seem to smoke the cigarette. It's there, lit, and I think I'm smoking it when I remember I have it. Other times I forget I have a lit cigarette and don't realize until I look down and see the cigarette of mostly ash. We went into his bedroom and he decided to put on Monty Python and the Meaning of Life. I prefer keeping my eyes closed while on 2C-B because the visuals are our favorite part. Colors in this geometric, almost grid that ebb and pulsate. Rooms always look strange, not right somehow, ugly even with my eyes open. Jack said the movie was awesome for tripping and I decided to watch it. Mistake. I always felt nauseous near peak, and after I did vomit, I feared it. The movie opens with a very nautical themed scene and I kept telling Jack I felt queasy. He thought I meant the peak and said, "Don't worry, it'll pass, it always does." Finally, I told him that the movie itself was making me queasy and he promptly turned it off. There seemed to be this whirlpool in the middle of the TV screen that took the images and whoosh, swirled them into this mess of stark colors and sound, and I could hardly understand the movie. He replaced it with the wall and things went well until the tremors hit. Each time I began to peak, I would get tremors. Initially, they would stop when I stopped peaking, but with each new 2C-B trip, the tremors would get more pronounced and last longer. Several people report the tremors, but when it happens to me, it gets scary. I told myself I shook as the peak hit me in waves, but the last time I hit my peak, the tremors stopped and Jack told me he even heard me go, "Okay, we're good now. This is nice. We're here now. We're done." I remember it was like I had all this turmoil and anxiety that just built up to a climactic release. It was amazing for a few minutes. Then I started violently shaking again. I began to get very scared because I had a gut instinct that something wasn't right. I knew I had peaked mentally, but my body was still trying to catch up. My mental and physical systems weren't in sync. It had happened before, and when I stopped focusing on the tremors, they'd go away. This time it hurt and the pain was feeding the fear. I couldn't break through that into the wonderful mental trip. My body seemed to be attempting to fight it, attack it almost. At this point, Jack, who had tripped on 2C-B countless times, began to worry. We were both attempting to pretend we weren't worried, but we weren't very convincing. I started to get cold, just so frigid. I curled under Jack's feather blanket to warm up. I finally got warm, but the tremors got worse. I began to have difficulty breathing. Jack said I was practically panting. It felt like I was breathing fire, then like I was breathing nothing at all. I knew I was, but I couldn't figure out why I was so short of breath and still so cold on the inside. Jack thought it was a bad trip and kept saying, "It'll be okay, it's okay." I asked him what was happening to me and he didn't know. It was very difficult to express my thoughts and I became torn. Mentally I was fine, but I knew something was very wrong with my body. I couldn't understand what, but I knew it wasn't a bad trip because when the tremors would rest for a minute, I could close my eyes and things were warm and happy and fantastic. I wanted to break and go inside, just have an inside trip without my body because I felt like it was holding me back and hurting me. Jack pulled the blanket off me when his laptop shut down. He said, "My computer is hot and it shut off to cool down. Your body is a computer, but what's the fan?" I remember looking at him and just saying, "I'm scared, Jack. This isn't fun. It hurts and I want it to stop. It's not a bad trip. Something's wrong." I started crying and I was still shaking, still so cold on the inside and still panting. Jack said he was hot and realized I wasn't sweating. He reached over to feel me and left the room. He came back with a thermometer. We argued. I felt cold, but he thought I was hot. The thermometer read that I had a temperature of 100.5 degrees Fahrenheit. He went into the kitchen and grabbed ice packs. I couldn't feel them when he threw them on me. The ice felt like his hand. Jack thought about a bath, but I was having trouble breathing. The ice packs melted rapidly and he got new ones. It didn't help much and I don't remember a lot past this point. Jack said I told him that I felt like something in me wasn't working when it should be, and that I kept looping saying, "I feel like I'm cooking on the inside." He began to search the web for an idea of what was wrong, and some of the things he asked me were right. He began to read off symptoms on a list and they all fit. Then he asked me if I wanted to go to the hospital. I will admit that my only response to that question is always an emphatic no. I overdosed a few years ago and was sent to the ER, then to rehab. I did some liver damage and even now have trouble drinking alcohol. He knew that it was obvious I had taken something and that I'd go to rehab again. Worse, he refused to leave me, so he'd get sent back to rehab too. The tremors had leveled in intensity but were still awful, and I began to feel something spasming inside my abdominal area. I kept saying, "It's my stomach." "No, it's not. It's behind." "What's behind?" "It's my stomach." Jack gave me an ultimatum. "If your temperature doesn't drop in the next 30 minutes or anything else happens, I'm calling an ambulance." My temperature did drop, hovering at about 98 degrees Fahrenheit, which is still a slight fever for me. He gave me water and I just chugged it, 2 or 3 bottles. I was drinking so much water and I wasn't sweating or urinating. Jack wondered where it went and searched the internet a little more. He looked at me and asked about my liver. I didn't understand and told him the truth, that it's a little damaged and doesn't quite work at full capacity. Later, when we were nearing baseline, I realized how stupid I'd been. At first, he thought it was a heat stroke, but when I started having pain, he thought it was something wrong with my kidneys. Once I was cool to the touch, he turned me over and felt my lower back. The area right where my kidney is was very hot still. We finally took some melatonin and went to sleep once we reached baseline. The afterword. My entire body was sore for 3 days. I was severely dehydrated. Not that you'll want to know this, but I got my period a week early. This happened every time I took 2C-B. I'd get my period despite being very regular and on the pill. I have since learned the pill can increase sensitivity to MDMA and 2C-B. The factors. Swimming dries skin out, making it more difficult to sweat. This could have contributed to the very high temperature. The pill can increase sensitivity, and I took a fairly large dose. Even not knowing this, it was too large for my body. My liver was slightly, very slightly damaged, and when something goes awry with my body, it has a harder time purifying my blood, plasma, and fat, just waste in general. My kidneys have a greater strain placed on them to pick up the slack. Conclusion. This was beyond strange. I should have listened to my body when I first started getting a strange vibe about 2C-B. From the second trip, something has always gone physically wrong. This is a drug that I should only take in low doses, if at all. There isn't enough research on the long-term or build-up effects of 2C-B on the body, and it seemed to have a degenerative effect with repeated high doses and frequent trips. Jack also feels this drug is risky. He had no ill effects past nausea in the beginning, and when he had his last trip, same dosage as the first, he experienced muscle soreness that lasted a few days, dehydration, and insomnia. Neither of us will ever touch 2C-B again. My doctor told me it was a heat stroke and extreme kidney stress. There are a lot of positives about 2C-B, and I did enjoy it greatly for a while, but this was hell. Hey, it's the Trip Keeper here. On an ending note, please do not switch to the wall when you're watching Monty Python before. That's an even worse movie to watch while tripping. If you haven't seen it, please watch it sober. I don't even recommend watching it high. That movie is pretty fucked up. Anyways, I don't know if that caused the bad trip because she didn't mention it again, but for me personally, it could have caused it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and you haven't already. Also comment down below what video you want me to do next. Thank you all so much. Bye.